My name is Diana Diakow, and I'm a psychologist and a linguist. And I've been working with forcibly displaced persons for a few years now. I've been teaching for 10 years, mostly in the context of informal education, but also formal education. So I've been teaching languages in public and in private schools at the university level and kindergarten level across the board. I've been also working in refugee camps and other resettlement agencies. So specifically in Greece, I've been working with a few organizations in Attica, but also in Evia and in Lesbos. And so I will be talking today about lessons for refugee students with low literacy, specifically. And so this is a very vague term, low literacy, but I will cover some aspects related to non-Roman alphabets, specifically following the example of Arabic. It's somewhat a continuation of what I was talking about last time. So last time when we met, some of you joined me for the webinar dedicated to trauma-informed lessons. So I won't be repeating those things, and I believe you can access these materials. So today it's going to be specifically about designing the lessons, and please write your comments during the session if you don't want to ask them right away, so that Colette can keep track of those and remind me to answer them if we're just wrapping up and some of your questions are not answered. There are going to be times assigned for asking questions, so just bear with me. And just let's get started. So first I will talk a little bit about literacy in general, and then I will introduce specifically one language teaching method that is called Total Physical Response, TPR. It is a method that is research-based and data-driven, so it is proven to work with students with very limited literacy. It was primarily designed for children. However, because we're talking about folks who are beginners, oftentimes with very limited skills, when it comes to literacy, this method is still applicable. And then we'll practice, and in the end, and also in the meantime, I will be introducing some online tools. So before that, this is just a screenshot, so don't pay attention to this pin number. What I want you to do, if you can, if not, just please bear with me and look at the screen. I want you to go to Kahoot. So this is the link. You can access that on your mobile device. It would be actually better because you will see my screen with some questions. And on this, on your mobile device, if you have access to another one, I will ask you to indicate the answer. So if you can go to this website, Kahoot, that would be great. And I'm just gonna show you the pin right now. You're gonna see on my screen questions, and you will have to tap the answer on your mobile device. So who do you teach? Adults, teenagers, children, all three? Okay, so adults mostly. We have some folks teaching teenagers and children only, and 7 people teach all 3 groups. Great. Thank you, everyone. So I just use that for my information now, so that I know who is with us today. But also, this is just one of the tools you can use, and I will talk a little bit about that later. So when it comes to literacy, that is just basically a compilation of skills that allow us to read and write. Some people argue that also speaking is included in that package. However, we are gonna be using the term literacy in terms of reading and writing only throughout this presentation. Can you see my, oh, is there anyone who cannot see my PowerPoint right now? Okay. So literacy, according to the research, is divided into 4 categories: pre-literate, non-literate, semi-literate, and non-Roman script literate. And we are focusing mostly on that last category today. However, as I told you before, this low literacy basically includes all 4. So pre-literate a student would be the one that is, for example, familiar with using a pen, using crayons, holding a pen, because this is a skill in itself. However, may not be able to produce words in writing or decode the symbols present in specific script. Then non-literate is someone who hasn't had any exposure perhaps to a formal education and hasn't been able to develop writing and reading skills. Semi-literate would be someone who can use the symbols or can decode them, but it's not a full proficiency. There are some glimpses of that here and there. However, usually that happens with folks who have a very limited educational experiences. That may apply to many of your refugee students. And then non-Roman script literate are all the folks who speak languages that are not written in Latin alphabet. So I'm talking here about Arabic, I'm talking about Farsi, I'm talking about many of the dialects present in the Middle East, who are just vernacular forms of Arabic or Kurmanji or Farsi. I'm talking also about Greek. I'm talking about the Cyrillics and Russian and other Balkan languages written in Cyrillics, and as well as a ton of other languages that basically use other letters than those that you can see in this presentation. And it has really serious implications for learning and for cognitive processing. I will be giving examples mostly based on Arabic because that's the language I'm proficient in, and I have just the most experience working with Arabic native speakers. But all of that is going to apply also to Farsi and Kurdish and other Middle Eastern dialects as well. I'm just trying to move something on my screen. So, okay. So obviously you already know that many of your students have had very diverse educational experiences. And that implies that it's not only, it doesn't only mean that they don't speak English, they don't speak Greek, or they don't speak German or French, or any other target language that you're teaching, but it also means that they have not have basically opportunities to develop any kind of literacy skills in their native language. So they may not be able to read and write in their mother tongue, because also something to be aware of in the Middle East, people speak dialects, people speak vernacular forms of Arabic that most of the times are not written. I mean, they're not taught through formal curriculum. So for example, in Syria, people go to school and they receive education in modern standard Arabic, and all the informal conversations are held in the dialect, in the Levantine dialect. And so in the TV series or something that is less formal, you can hear the dialect, you can write in dialect. However, all the books and articles, newspapers, media is presented in modern standard Arabic. And so that means that if you don't go to school, it is very difficult for you to learn how to write if you don't have these opportunities. And so we know that many of our students have had interrupted education. So that's something to keep in mind. And when it comes to the implications of that, one of those implications include just an infamiliarity with educational system in itself. So you may have students who are confused, not only because you're teaching them, let's say, English or German, they're confused because they may not be really accustomed with the school environment. And I know that many of you teach in many informal settings that don't look like regular classrooms, but still this is a setting when someone comes and is giving me instructions on something and I don't necessarily know what to do. I know that some of you may have these questions around the topic of like, what do I do with my adult students who can't keep up with learning and there is no progress? I mean, partially it's because They may not have just basically learning skills. Many children, many students in schools and universities, they don't have learning skills, so we need to teach them those, and that specifically, that even applies more to the refugee context. Just even the cultural attitudes related to your role as a teacher, you need to answer yourself a question, what kind of biases you bring. And this is something I talked about last time, but understanding that, for example, your students may not be willing to engage in a communication with you in the class simply because they come from the culture that promotes humbleness and that promotes withdrawal, and that is not encouraging asking questions, because letting people know that you don't know something can be really shameful and embarrassing. For most of us, it might be embarrassing, but in some cultures, in many Middle Eastern cultures, this is even more so, just because of the cultural norms. So they may not engage with you, not because they don't understand, but because it is just cultural thing. They may expect you to be this authority figure because, again, the standard curriculum in Middle Eastern schools put a teacher in that authority position. And so for many of us who come from more Western backgrounds, where it's the system is more, educational system is more egalitarian in a way that we interact with each other on an informal register, especially with adult students, we expect this partnership. That may not be something relevant to the context of working with refugee students who come from Middle Eastern backgrounds, but also other backgrounds in Central Asia, in many African countries too, because they will expect you to provide instructions only, not really interact with them on like this more private level, or they may feel intimidated when you try to pursue a more informal relationship with them, or be just more playful or entertaining in the classroom. That may not be well received, or they won't be able to quickly navigate these attitudes that you present in the classroom. So it's really, really important to understand what educational system you grew up in and what kind of habits you're bringing to your class. Another thing related to the fact that your students speak speak languages written in non-Roman scripts has to do with our ability to perceive the space. So as you can imagine, since your early childhood, you are accustomed to read from right to left or from top to bottom, that is changing your perception a lot. And so according to the research, our ability to dissect dimensions is really influenced by the language that we speak, and especially our literacy, because this is how we navigate everything that we see on the paper. For the students who speak these languages like Arabic or Farsi, it may sometimes be challenging to understand, for example, tables or charts or timetables. I had situations when students were really confused about reading timetables, and some of the tutors were surprised that students were not showing up for the lessons, but it was partially because they just didn't know how to read the days. It's not only a matter of a language, because these timetables were provided in the native language of that person, but just navigating the space was really, really confusing. So be mindful if you put any kind of dates or any kind of numbers, how do you put them? Because, for example, in Arabic, numbers are written from left to right. However, all the script is written from right to left. So then if you see a script like Latin script, for example, English or German, and you see numbers, that can be really confusing. So that's something to keep in mind. Then the ability to follow instructions, it's also influenced by our preliminary language proficiencies that we have. So that's something to be mindful of. And another aspect related to literacy has to do with just our ability to use school materials. You'll have students who may be challenged to understand the difference between, for example, vertical and horizontal dimension. And again, that is really influenced by the exposure to language, and also it is influenced by schooling experiences. So I've had students who had trouble placing, for example, a notebook or using a paper or completing the sentences, or basically just putting anything on the paper that will require some spatial awareness. It's not like they don't have that spatial awareness, they have it, but it's different. And many worksheets that we use, by default, we print them out, they're not adjusted for students whose native language is different than a European language. And I'm talking about those European languages that are written in Latin specifically. So that's something to be mindful of. And more specifically, when it comes to the learning style of students with low literacy, and so I'm talking about all these groups who are pre-literate, semi-literate, and also non-Roman alphabet literate, they tend to learn things by doing and watching. And that's why today we're going to talk about total physical response, because this is a method based on moving. They tend to be orally oriented. Why? Because it just visual prompts are not something that is specific to them. They haven't interacted with them too much. They haven't interacted with written words too much, and also with pictures. So speaking one more time, speaking. I know some of you have been asking, so how should we balance speaking and writing and reading and all of that? My answer is that if it really depends on your class. If you have a student who wants to pursue education in whatever country and speak that target language in a proficient manner, then of course reading and writing is important. But for most of your students, speaking, that's gonna be the most important, and some really, really basic literacy skills also can be helpful. But given that also your students come from the backgrounds that are quite adverse, and they've experienced a lot of failures and a lot of just basically adverse events, it's really important to empower them. And learning through writing and reading can be incredibly frustrating, especially for those students that haven't had any educational experiences before, because they may not see progress. And I wouldn't like to learn myself if I don't see progress. You want to see progress in the beginning, and usually that happens quicker when you speak. These students also learn through repetition, and that has to do with two things. First of all, it's repetition requires speaking, and because they are orally oriented, they are gonna be prone to repeat everything that you say, that you introduce. That's gonna be something that they like and enjoy. Secondly, in the Middle Eastern context, in schools, repetition is the primary default form of teaching, and it's just cultural. Also, many of your students may have had experiences with different sorts of madrasas, which are the schools that are, I wouldn't say they're religious schools, but the curriculum is taught through different religious activities. And so there's a lot of activities that involve reading, for example, Quran. And one of the methods to learn Quran is to repeat. So repetition, one more time, repetition. That's something to be expected. And again, I am really aware of the fact that in other cultural contexts, repetition is discouraged, because there is also research that that shows that that's not the most effective way of learning. However, it really enhances a retention of the material that we learn. So it is still useful. However, of course, it differs across different educational contexts. And in the refugee context, repetition can be something that feels familiar to your students. Then obviously the limited ability to read can affect the learning. So you will see students who struggle with learning how to read and write because of the factors that I mentioned before. Lack of confidence in their learning ability. And again, that has to do with the trauma background. It has to do with the fact that they're adults, and many of them will feel really ashamed that they cannot read and write, because of course they're aware of that. And that can be incredibly frustrating, that they need to start from the basics. Even though they want to express their complex ideas, they won't be able to do that. Important thing is that in that educational context, we need to adjust the content that and make it be relevant to their lives. So of course we want them to learn vocabulary related to fruits and vegetables. That's useful, but maybe we can just bring more advanced vocabulary right away because they just use that on daily basis. You know, when we work with children, we use simple words because they engage in play, they engage in activities that don't require complex sentences and complex language, but your adult learners would appreciate if you introduce the vocabulary and phrases that they can actually use on daily basis. And then it's also important to acknowledge that because many of our students may have limited experiences with education and learning in general, they may place equal value on everything that they learn. So and that's something that is on your side of responsibility. You need to be mindful how you present the content. So if you know that maybe knowing all the irregular verbs in English, it's important, but this is not a core of the language. We don't have to be able to correctly conjugate all the verbs in the participle form in order to communicate. So maybe not overwhelming our students with the conjugation tables, but giving them the phrases would be more relevant to that context. And one point that I want to highlight is that Arabic native speakers tend to rely on their left brain hemisphere to read in Arabic as compared to English native speakers who rely on both hemispheres. And so this is, there has been quite a bit of research on people whose native languages are written in other scripts than Latin. And especially in Arabic, that has to do with the fact that in order to read in Arabic, you need to pay attention to details, to little dots. Additionally, Arabic is an abjad script, so that means that only consonants are written, and there are tiny little marks above and below that indicate the vowels. So it is really challenging even for native Arabic speakers to read in Arabic, and they learn it in school. And so if they have that experience, they develop the literacy skills that basically is wired differently in the brain as compared to people who, for example, native language is English, because left brain hemisphere is responsible for decoding details. And so what that means for you is that we need to stimulate both hemispheres in learning, because they may also struggle to acquire English or German and also Greek simply because they won't be able to, or it's not like they're not able to, it may be more challenging for them on that neurocognitive level to integrate these skills that require both hemispheres to collaborate at the same time, simply because this is not how they decode information in their native language. I'm talking about people who are literate. But again, there are students who have had exposure to reading in their native language, so be mindful of that, that we really need to develop and design activities that enhance both hemispheres. And TPR really helps with that. So one of the things I was doing, I've been using TPR like across the board with different students, and I'm just gonna demonstrate something quickly for you right now. So let me just stop sharing my screen. Okay, so now you can see me. I hope so. I cannot see you. Where is my Zoom? Okay, here we go. So before I start talking about the TPR, here is just a very simple demonstration of how it can look like in practice. So let's say I want my students to repeat, and especially that's important for online teaching. I'm gonna use a lot of hands, a lot of gestures, facial expressions. It's all about the movement. So let's say I'm gonna say, it is big. It is big. Now you tell me. Now you tell me. So I'm basically pairing words with gestures, and they have to be consistent. And especially in online teaching, it's really important. I know it may feel awkward because you just need to take up all the space and act a lot, but it really helps the students. It may feel infantile. I know some people kind of push back against that, But the truth is, this is effective method. I use that with children, and then obviously I use different props, teddy bears in different visuals and pictures and objects. But with adult learners, I don't use maybe teddy bears, but I use a lot of gestures. So I'm basically prompting them. So now I'm saying it is big, and so now you tell me, and then I can do something like that, indicating that I'm listening. So I do that with adult learners, especially with beginners, all the time. So when I do that, they know that I listen and they need to talk. So there are some tips on how to develop these gestures, and you can find them online, but it's also up to your creativity, really. Sign language helps a lot. If anyone of you has had any exposure, if no, you can look it up as well. But basically using your facial expressions is incredibly important. So for example, let's say I want to introduce myself, and I would say something like, my name is Diana. What? And then I can, for example, have some sort of words already prepared, and I can say, what is your name? So it's really up to you what things you're gonna use. You can use cards, you can use flashcards, you can use the whiteboard, and I will go through the steps of TPR in a second. But if you work with children, teddy bears and any kind of props are really, really encouraged. So for all my online lessons, I always have my, he's called Tommy, I mean, depends on the kid, but most of them call him Tommy. And so we always are together in our lessons, just because it's more child friendly. And when I, for example, start the lesson, and that also is with adult learners, I have different mascots like this, or I have flashcards, and I just bring them, and I do that both in like face-to-face teaching and also online teaching. And so I ask them, so how are you doing today? And I show them the options, and they just basically point in the beginning, but then they develop the vocabulary, because as you will see in TPR, it's important to kind of shadow your student and talk over them a little bit in the beginning. But again, that the ratio of talking and listening changes. But with your beginner students, you're gonna be talking a lot, showing things a lot. They're gonna be silent, and that's totally expected. It's rather discouraged to force your student to talk in the beginning. And it's not like they don't learn. They learn, they absorb that knowledge, and that comes at some point all together. And so they produce these sentences and they respond, but also they need to build their confidence. So there's no need to rush through speaking, really, because that can be really damaging for their learning, and can be really, really difficult. And again, if you feel and you recognize now kind of a bias that, oh, that sounds really infantile way of teaching, I'm assuring you that this is a very effective way of teaching with across all the age groups. And it's really up to you how you're going to modify the material that you present and the activities that you use. So there is no limitation. So I mentioned total physical response is basically a language teaching method that is built around the coordination of speech and action. It's a very kinetic, it's a very motion driven teaching method. And so Asher, who developed this method in 1960, he was very inspired by the way how children learn a language. So he observed that children learn the language by doing the things, by touching the things. And so he got to the conclusion that we basically learn any language in that particular manner. So primarily that method was used with children. Now it's used across the board. It's not only used with languages. I've seen teachers using that with math, with science, with literature. So basically anything that requires to present a new material. And so the core of this method is basically stating that the verb in imperative form is central to our language learning. And it can feel school-like to some of you, because, okay, you know, with my adult students, I'm not gonna constantly remind them, write it down, sit down, stand up, listen. But when you analyze the speech, and the utterances that we produce on daily basis, there is a lot of imperatives. And so imperatives allow us to understand what we are expected to do. And that's why in TPR, we start with imperatives. So we start introducing the verbs first, and of course, then you follow up also on nouns and adjectives, but the focus is really on the verbs. So when I was demonstrating like this, so that means that I listen, and now you tell me, I listen. And of course, I'm using here very simple tenses as well, because we work with students with limited literacy. So I'm not gonna say I am listening, because that's like really complex grammar. I'm gonna just say I listen, because that is much simpler. So it's also important to know kind of how sequentially introduce the material, and I bet that you've already got plenty of exposure to understand that hierarchy. So the verbs are very important. And so why TPR is working? Well, it's working because it's integrating mostly 3 different domains of learning. Kinesthetic learning, meaning moving, audio learning, listening, and visual learning. So we don't have, as you can see, we don't have specifically writing and reading here. And the reason for that is that we are working with students with limited literacy. And as I said you before, they rely on auditory and visual input and motor input more than they are going to rely on the figurative meaning of the words or decoding the symbols. And when we even want to go deeper into that, writing is a kinetic activity anyhow. So that comes later. But for most of your students, speaking is going to be the most important part. And of course, you can teach them very simple words and how to write. But in the beginning, I would rather encourage you to focus on enhancing their speaking skills. And of course, you prompt them with visual input. And when you introduce new words, you're going to present them on the board or flashcards or whatever else you have. But basically moving, speaking, and listening. These are the core components. And so the underlying fundamental theories of TPR assume that we have an innate biological program that allows us to acquire language, as children have. It kind of comes back to Chomsky, that we have this innate grammar system, and so we develop that regardless of our background. So even the students who haven't had any schooling experiences have high chance to be really successful in acquiring a language. Then the brain lateralization, this is basically the split between our hemispheres. And so in TPR, we want to integrate both hemispheres. And motion is really doing a great job with that. And again, when it comes to working with refugee students, incredibly important, because again, their native languages stimulate the brain slightly differently. I'm talking about those students who have had exposure to writing and reading. Then TPR really is engaging. So it's very entertaining. You can do a lot of different things. It's up to your level of confidence in doing those, and just basically being an actor in your classroom. And so we know that the stress reduction is really important in learning because it enhances memorization. It has to do with the hormones and neurotransmitters that are released during the learning, and experiencing positive emotions enhances learning a lot. Of course, there is also the body of research that shows that if we are exposed to traumatic events, we memorize things better, but I'm not talking about this kind of learning. I'm talking about organized, safe learning. So that means that we want to induce as much humor and as much positive attitude in our classroom as possible. And then trace theory has to do with the way we memorize the things. So in TPR, and it's not only in TPR, but basically the theory claims that every piece and bit of information that we memorize is encoded in our neurological structures. So whatever we learn, it has its own representation in our brain, in synapses. There are some connections happening, and we want to facilitate those in the language teaching. So why should you bother with TPR and even like try that? Well, because it really, really helps students remember new phrases and words. It's an excellent method for for the beginner students, just because it's really friendly and it's really effective because it really stimulates both hemispheres. For children, I would say that it's impossible to teach a language to a kid without using TPR. And we do that very often intuitively. With adults, sometimes there is the tendency to just kind of be more passive and be really produce this meta language about language. So basically to be talking at our students. But again, I wouldn't encourage that in the population that we work with. And then it can be used both in a large group and in a small group, and it doesn't require much preparation if you feel comfortable with your body and acting. And of course, I encourage you to prepare props and like bring different objects to the classroom. So in that regard, it requires some preparation, but I would say that for most part, no worksheets needed really. And again, it really, really evokes and induces a lot of positive attitude in the classroom, and it's suitable for all ages and all the backgrounds. And I've noticed that just basically students who come from the displacement context, they really are finding themselves comfortable with the instructions delivered in that way. So before we start practicing, I want to guide you through the steps. When you introduce any word, when you introduce any sort of bit of information in the target language, you are going to say the word and perform the movement with the class. So when I start teaching, I basically introduce the very basic phrases like listen, say it, listen, say it. And so I'm going to demonstrate that, listen, and say that phrase at the same time. And I will ask my students, by basically showing that I am expecting their input, to do it with me. And it may sound like, oh, but some students may not feel comfortable doing it. Yes, in your classroom, there are going to be folks who are going to be sitting and not doing anything. And there are going to be people who are intuitively going to be showing these things with you, and they're going to mimic you. And so then I'm going to say the word listen, and the students are going to basically perform the movement. So I'm going to say listen and indicate that I'm expecting the answer. So they need to present the movement. This is a silent period of learning. Some folks are gonna be in that period for 1 minute, some of them for a week or 2 weeks or even longer, because they will not feel comfortable speaking, but they will develop comprehension skills. And so I'm going to do the movement, and then they're gonna say it. So that is for the instructions. But let's say I wanna introduce vocabulary related to, I don't know, adjectives. So it's the same method. I'm gonna say big, big, small, big, small. And so then I'm going to say the word big, and the students are showing, and then I'm going to show it, and they're gonna say that along with performing the movement. So it's a really, really intuitive way of learning. And there are a number of different activities you can incorporate in your class, starting with imperative drills, so basically all these commands that we are using, and other verbs. It doesn't only apply to listen and sit down, it applies to all the sorts of verbs you're going to be using and teaching. Then role plays, visuals, demonstrations, repetition. It's really, really important. Group activities, storytelling, songs, drawing, acting, basically all the sorts of teaching methods that you use, you can use them with the TPR. You just need to be creative and don't be embarrassed and ashamed and uncomfortable in performing in your class. And I'll give you some examples. So again, some commands that you need to develop in the classroom, and you need to be consistent with how you perform them. So if you decide to use this symbol for listening, I use this one, I use that all the time. I don't alter it. It's not like I come one day to class or online session or whatever other setting I'm in, and I will start performing this, because the students will be confused. It's important to teach them that means I listen. And so they learn that, and just basically keep it consistent. So sit down, line up, be quiet. And so then ideally you're just gonna do this, and the students will know that you need to be quiet, and they learn that very quickly. And that spurs you also some energy on talking, and sometimes getting just frustrated over disciplining the students. And as I said last time when we met to discuss the trauma-informed teaching, I mentioned that when students experience distress, it is important not to be talking at them, because it's really overwhelming when they get that stimulation from the environment, because first of all, they may not understand what you're talking about because of the language barrier. So it may feel really, really overwhelming to receive so much instructions during the times when I'm basically emotionally dysregulated. So you want, ideally, your students be in the place that you can use your nonverbals. First of all, because it's less stressful. Secondly, it requires less processing. It's more intuitive, and it's just basically establishing a positive rapport with them and keeping them safe. So now I want us to practice, and before Colette splits you into the breakout room, I will explain what we're gonna do. So I will ask you to be in the group of 4, so we're gonna have 10 groups, and basically each of you is going to present a TPR-based instructions. So Colette is gonna send you these prompts. I'm just gonna write them down for her.
One thing we could do is people could take a photo of the screen on their phone, and so then they've got
okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing it. So what I want you to do is basically the person, you choose who is person 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can stick to these instructions. What's your name? Ask me a question, tell me what's happened, or show me where it is, or you can develop your own thing. It can be a complex sentence, it doesn't have to be a complex sentence. I will show you some alternative ways of presenting those in TPR, but for now, I just want you to focus on nonverbals. So develop your own little script and protocol on how you basically teach that. So let's say I want to teach a student that I go to sleep. So I'm gonna show I go to sleep. So as you can see, I'm pairing every word in that sentence with some nonverbal. And so then I'm going to ask my student to basically repeat that with me in a kinetic way. So I go to sleep. And ideally, they're gonna do these movements with me, and they're gonna shadow me. And then I am going to say, I go to sleep. Show me. And so they're gonna show that to me, and then I'm gonna listen and do that. So, and of course, you can alter that in your classroom. You don't have to stick to that every single time you introduce a new phrase. It is helpful with the phrases that you use often and with new material. Then you reduce the number of these non-verbal complex protocols that you present. But for now, this is what I want you to do. Person 1 is focusing on one phrase and is developing these nonverbals and is trying to teach the group how to perform that. And so let's maybe have 8-10 minutes to do that. I encourage you to also experiment with other phrases in the target language. I challenge you, if you, for example, teach Greek and your group doesn't speak Greek, teach them something in Greek. Try to teach them something simple and see how that goes. And we'll get back together in let's say 8 minutes. Okay. Okay, so I would like to hear a little bit about your experiences with this exercise, if anyone is willing to share. You have to unmute yourself if you want to share something.
I think most of us are.
Kiki, what did you say?
I think that some of us are unmuted, but hi everyone, this is Kiki.
Hello, Kiki.
Hi. So our experience from everyday teaching, from the group, from what?
No, from the group. And yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, it's not that different, especially for people that do not know each other, that are not familiar with each other. It's a little bit strange. It's a little awkward at the beginning to be so exposed. I also think that it's a matter of character, of personality. If someone is quite extrovert and tends to use gestures and moving while talking, then it's easier to apply this method. For those who are a little bit, more close as characters, it's a little bit harder. I don't know.
Yeah, Kiki, thank you. I appreciate your comment. This is something that we discussed in our group to some extent too. So basically, some of us may feel more comfortable than others. And when we work with our students, we are exposed in the center of attention. That can be intimidating. And at the same time, we are in the role of delivering instructions. So kind of need to work on our own comfort level with that. In our group, we talked about translating that knowledge and that skill set to working with adults because it can feel infantile. And my answer to that is that the adults respond to that. They reciprocate with these instructions. It's our bias and our discomfort. I've been teaching mostly teenagers and children, but also adults at like different ages with different educational backgrounds. And it's really the matter of setting that default that you come to the classroom and teacher Diana is just using a lot of nonverbals, and we expect that. Nothing weird about that. And so your students are gonna follow you along, and some of them may want to gesticulate, some of them won't. However, even if they won't gesticulate, they learn because you pair these stimuli, visual with kinetic stimuli, and they learn it. They may feel uncomfortable doing this, and they don't have to do it. I mean, ideally they would, but I don't force my adult students to do that. Children do it very naturally. With adult students, I just make sure that I present nonverbals, especially with the beginners and elementary level students. But they don't have to follow me along and mimic every single gesture that I do. However, they learn faster when I present nonverbals. And so that really helps me to manage the group. And they learn that I just gesticulate and they don't mind. I've never heard any student complaining about it. I've been asking my adult students if they feel like it's ridiculous and it's not serious enough. No, they always say they really enjoy it. It's fun. They enjoy coming to lessons. So it's our personal bias that we have. Another thing that in our group we talked about has to do with culture. So in some cultures, we gesticulate more than in others. So in my native culture, no, we're very reserved people as compared, for example, to Arabs. And for many Greek native speakers, not for everyone, because of course there is temperament and all of that, but you gesticulate more. And so that may come easier. For example, there are also many gestures that you may want to familiarize yourself for the sake of working with your students. Like in Arabic, let's say we do this, and that means like "Shufi, Shu Sara," like what happened. And so you don't have to do all of this, what has happened, and develop nonverbals for every tiny bit of information, because there's already something that exists. So perhaps in my class, I would just use this to indicate like, what happened, tell me. But for people who come from Northern European countries and from Western countries, it can be a little bit more challenging because we're just not used to gesticulate that much. And also be cautious about the nonverbals that you use. So pointing with the finger, that's something to watch out for, because in Arab culture that's rather rude to do that with your finger. So you want to make sure that you always use a palm. And it's also in many African cultures, pointing with the finger, showing this, this can be really inappropriate, also in some European countries too. But so I would rather encourage you to show something that is more fluid, like a hand up, a hand down, and use your facial expressions instead of using a finger. And these symbols, these three are that can be misinterpreted quite significantly. Other comments? If no, then we're just gonna move further, and you can type your questions. So I'll answer them in just a second. Okay. So some do's and don'ts when it comes to TPR. It is a really good method for learning, for teaching new vocabulary, new phrases in the beginning of your units with students who have difficulties, all sorts of difficulties in expressing themselves and speaking in confidence. But maybe for the words that students already know very well, we wouldn't use all the symbols that we've been using and gestures that we've been using before. And so one of you who I had a pleasure to work with in the group indicated that then when, for example, I know my students, I would perhaps do only this to say, ask me a question, or just do this to indicate that I want to listen and you maybe have a question. So you kind of want to cluster these nonverbals, and so maybe then put more words into one nonverbal, and that happens very naturally because this is just a very distinct and characteristic symbol question, and so the students will learn that. So you don't want to repeat the whole story. Tell me something, I listen, you say. So you don't want to act too much because ideally you want your students to speak. So these instructions are delivered in the beginning, and then they are gonna be reduced. When it comes to correcting your students, I discourage that. In the beginning, I would say there is no space for corrections for a couple of reasons. First of all, because of confidence level. This is not encouraging to be corrected, both pronunciation-wise, structure-wise, grammar-wise, whatever vocabulary-wise. Some students can have that expectation that you will be correcting them, and so if you notice that, do that. But if you see students, and that's perhaps often happens, who are inconfident, and so they are going to say a little bit and then be kind of hesitant to say more, you just make sure that you listen. And so affirm and use your nonverbals, present that active listening, engage in active listening, make them feel like you really want to know and they are doing a great job, because it is really, really encouraging. And so when it comes to TPR and corrections, you don't want to do that because it's primary a method that enhances speaking in the beginning. And so if you are worried about developing writing skills with your students, you let's say you introduce verbs or adjectives, you use these flashcards, you use posters. When I say, let's say, run, I can show it, but I will also perhaps write it on the whiteboard or a piece of paper and stick it or wherever, whatever other material I can use to just present the word and pair that visual with the movement. But you can also obviously introduce the alphabet this way, if you feel like that's important to your curriculum. But corrections are not that encouraged in the beginning in general. And there is also an alternative approach, or like another one that I used a lot, and many teachers who work with students with limited literacy rely on, is a meaning-based approach. So it is used a lot again with children, but again, a really successful methods with the adults. So you can purchase, or you can make it yourself, a cluster of colorful objects that have different length, different dimensions. So specifically for this method, there is a company that produces colorful wooden rods. And so these pieces of wood have different colors and different lengths. I don't have this set with me here, but basically what you are gonna do with it, you are gonna present one piece of this wood for one word. So you can use colorful stones, you can use colorful papers, you can use whatever objects that are just different from each other, and they differ on one or maximum 2 dimensions. so color and length usually, and size. And so if I say the question, what is your name? I'm gonna place it in front of the student or in place where they can see that. And basically every word in that question is represented by an object. And so I want to keep it consistent. So my question tags, what, why, when, where, are going to be the same type of object. So let's say a blue piece of paper of this particular size, or just a blue color if I want to pair only color. Then the second part is the verb, and so the verb is going to be a different piece of paper, and then your is going to be a different piece of paper, and name is going to be a different piece of paper. So I'm just going to show that to you really quickly, how you can do that in the non-verbal way online. I think you can see me. So what I would do, let's say I have sticky notes, and I would just place them on the whiteboard or like whatever you use. You can also do it with some interactive whiteboards that you share with your students online. So let's say I want to teach my students that it is big. So it is big. And even if my students don't know how to read and write, I would still write it. And so they know that this color represents it. This is a verb is, and this is an adjective. And so let's say today I'm teaching adjectives. And so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna have a lot of different yellow papers with words or just flashcards. And so let's say we've already covered big, small, fast, slow, pretty, ugly, and all of that. And so I'm just gonna replace it. So let's say I'm going to present a flashcard to them or a picture, and I will ask them, so what is it? It is big, it is small, and whatever. And so then I can also change my pronoun to he, she, or I can just even change the verb. So it is really the matter of pairing one stimulus with the word category. So I would encourage you that you use the same color for verbs, the same color for pronouns, the same color for adjectives, or anything that is relevant to your teaching method at the moment and the material that you cover. I use both with children and with adults. In the setting where I'm face-to-face, I would perhaps use some objects, but I also use these colorful papers. And again, the same purpose is served by using different colors of markers. If you don't have these sticky notes and just too much of a hassle, you just write things in different colors. It's important that you pair consciously and really purposefully the stimuli that you use. Other games that are TPR based, that was for like teaching alphabet and numbers, but you can literally play this with everything. So verbs, adjectives, phrases, full sentences, anything. So let's say I covered the material and this is a revision part. So what I'm gonna do with it, I have something underneath and I have the numbers. So it's just a nice way to kind of warm up the class that you teach and get students involved. And so let's say that we've covered numbers a long time ago, but every once in a while I will bring them back, and so I'll ask the students, so tell me the number, and they say, let's say 4, and they see something underneath. Here was the letter, but that can be a question. What's your name? What do you like? How's been your day? Or anything else that you want them to review. And so it is more engaging. You can cross it out. You can give them points. You can make it be just more entertaining and more interactive. So basically, it's the same that I would do on a worksheet, but I'm not gonna do it on the worksheet because it's boring, and it is just more entertaining to engage them in team playing as a group, because that also reduces that pressure that, oh, I need to perform because I have this one worksheet only for me and I need to do it right. And so some students can have that preference, but for most part, it is better if you engage the whole group and they feel like they also develop some friendships in the meantime and some social skills and all of that. And so with young learners, especially online, I would again emphasize the importance of using different sorts of reinforcers, so awards and rewards for adult students too. So for young learners and also for teenagers, I'm using all sorts of different stickers. So when they say things right, and I do that, like if it's like an hour session, even with the group, it happens all the time. So I would show them a sticker. It's a great job, and just place it somewhere. And so they know that 5 stickers, that means that we play a game, or 10 stickers, that means that we do something else. So it really depends on what you want to introduce in your classroom. You can use different sorts of medals and show them those things, and then always place them in front of them. So when you teach online, they have to see all these things on their screen. With adults, I perhaps would not use teddy bears and all of that, but I would still use a lot of nonverbals, that they do a great job, and still reinforces work. We all like being rewarded. Doesn't matter if we're 40, 50, 60, 20, or 5 years old. We like it, it feels great. And again, I want to reiterate that it's our own discomfort as teachers that often we think that adults don't appreciate it. There is no really evidence to support that. And so the very last thing is the questions, basically. But let me show you this presentation one more time so that I can quickly just mention some of the tools. So in the very beginning, I used the Kahoot, and Kahoot is an excellent tool for quizzes, for questions, for online teaching. I highly recommend it. There are a lot of different options. It's for free. Then these 3 resources, ESL Library, ESL Collective, and Off Tool Class, they're for free for most part, and there is a ton of different resources, worksheets, PowerPoints with interactive games, videos. I love the videos. So on this ESL Collective, what you basically do, you go, you have a video, and you add your own questions, and it can be with music, it doesn't have to be. You share your screen, and the student can see that video, and once in a while, there is a stop and there's a question, or there is something to be answered in that video. So you can basically copy and paste a link from YouTube to that platform. So I encourage you to play with that. You can also encourage your students to use Quizlet to create their own vocabulary, flashcards, and anything that they want to review. As for teaching in itself, obviously we're using Zoom right now. So you can use Zoom. There is a whiteboard function that I really like. And so if you're not familiar, I'm just gonna quickly show that to you. That's my whiteboard, and I can text here, I can draw things. There are like different arrows, different colors. I can use the indicator. I can also save it, so then I can send it to my students after the lesson, and I can share that with someone. Let's say I'm gonna share it with, so someone can be writing on my whiteboard. Maybe with Mara, Mara is not here, Alikari. So I'm sharing right now my whiteboard with someone who just said hi. So yeah, that's something to just be careful about. Sometimes I have some stories with students putting some inappropriate content on the whiteboard, so you kind of want to control that a little bit. But there is this function on Zoom, in addition to, for example, Google Classroom, that is a bit more complicated. Skype is easier. On Skype, you would not have access to whiteboard, but you would still open like a Google Doc or something and write it so your students can see that. So these are the tools that I use the most often. Of course, there are many more. You can also use the just simple Google Drive for creating different presentations, PowerPoints. So what I would do, I also, for example, just create the PowerPoint and I present it as I did on Zoom before, and I ask students to describe something that is happening here, or I introduce some colloquial phrases, and again, it's the same manner. I just present it to my student. online, and then I provide some context, so we learn some colloquial expressions in this way. So many different things that you can do. But I also want to answer your questions. I tried to answer some of those that you already sent to us beforehand. But if you have any questions right now, I'm happy to answer those. Okay, so you have a question about learning assessments in the end for low-level learners. Again, I would perhaps refrain from using any sort of tests. That's like not the environment that we want to introduce these tests unless they're preparing for specific tests, but of course then the literacy level is going to be different. So I would just encourage you to play the games with them. I would, for example, what I do storytelling. So I print out the stories that are presented on the pictures, and I give them a set of the pictures. And so what I ask them to do is basically have the picture and you perform that. Or I prepare the games where they draw the vocabulary. And so I have these flashcards and they see vocabulary and they need to perform it to one another. So it's just playing this guessing game that one person performs that, the other one is guessing, so that I can see that they understand the meaning behind that word. So that's really important. When it comes to the storytelling, you just want them to provide this narrative to something that is presented visually. They can act. You can also do role plays with them. So one person has a picture, the other one is providing visual, providing that kinetic input in a way. So basically anything that has to do with developing a narrative that would be really helpful as a form of revision. This sort of games that I showed you is very simple one. This bingo game. It's like a very quick assessment for you to know if they understood the material, if they didn't. These kind of instructions with the colorful papers and rocks and the wooden rods. This is for teaching, but then obviously you want them to give you sentences, so you can print them out maybe and hand them to your students. So they just make these puzzles, put the sentences together, and ideally they're just gonna speak. So you can give them words and then ask them just, one word, let's say big, and you ask them to make a sentence or tell a story about it. Or you give them 5 completely disconnected words and you ask them to show you the story or tell you the story in whatever simple terms they can. Storytelling, it's a really important part of learning. As for learning more about TPR, on that PowerPoint, I'm just going to share this link with you right now quickly. There's a lot of material online when it comes to TPR on YouTube, but it's mostly for children. VIP Kids, that's a service for online teaching for Americans. And so there are some YouTubers who were putting some videos on, so you can see demonstrations. They're gonna be definitely for children. There's not much TPR for adults online when it comes to videos, but you can just read about it and in this link, and I will also send you a handout. And I will also send you a lesson plan for TPR. It's nothing else than what I covered today. It's just a lesson plan for the language of science. And if you were at the stage of planning your lessons in that way, which some people do, I do that sometimes, you again start with the topic, objectives, and then you choose the target vocabulary, materials, and then you consciously put an effort into developing instruction and modeling. And so here, this is really like descriptive, but you don't have to be that descriptive. And so you just want to plan ahead, like what do you do in order to teach students this target vocabulary? And so then there is a game also included, so you'll get that file. But again, anything that is interactive, it's highly encouraged. And online space is excellent for TPR, even though it might not sound like it. but you need to move to keep your students engaged online if you are teaching online. For starting to use pencils from letters, you mean just basically how to hold a pencil and how to develop the basic literacy skills? Okay, so that's a whole story in itself, how to develop, because this is an eye-hand coordination, motor-visual coordination, and that comes back to basics. I can share a material with you about that through email. But basically what you start doing, you first have to develop the ability to grasp objects. So if it's with children, you're gonna introduce clay and all of that, all sorts of games with the materials that they can squeeze so they develop the muscles. Then there are some great tools out there which I encourage you to explore. There are sort of crayons that look like little rocks that are adjusted to this non-specific pinching movement. So that requires a lot of effort. So you need to start with something that is more round and irregular. So that's obviously, that's not it. I don't have one here, but that looks something like that. So there are these sort of crayons or objects. You can maybe even create your own by using clay and putting a piece of a pencil inside if you don't have resources, so that your students hold it like this, because this is just much easier. And so they are gonna transition to using objects that are thinner. And so then for developing ability to write, you just start with the basics, you do tracing. You know, it feels infantile, but that's like how you develop the movement. If you want the students to learn the basics of the basics in writing, you need to start with, this is like a super brief introduction to it, but in simple words, you start with holding the objects from bigger to smaller, and then tracing, and so then they can develop writing skills. Other questions they haven't answered?
There was one question that was given to us prior. I'm going to put it in the box. Maybe you covered this. I don't think you did. Do you think it's of benefit to have mixed age classes?
It is challenging to have mixed ages. In the refugee context, it hasn't happened to me a single time that I had a group of the same age students. I would say that this is instruction-wise challenging. At the same time, that's the reality of teaching in this context, and I'd say that you can utilize that as a resource. So I would encourage you to use your older students to be your assistants in a way. In delivering the instructions. Keep them basically busy, but also keep your young learners busy. So you can encourage your young learners to like hand the materials. And what is important, cluster them is if you can, based on age. Especially if you teach more complex language skills, cluster them as much as you can, not only based on age, what is more important, based on proficiency. Because you can have a 14-year-old girl and a 40-year-old woman who will be the same language proficiency level. So the fact that they're different ages doesn't mean that it's instruction-wise appropriate to divide them. I would encourage you to actually pair them because they have similar language skills. Of course, sometimes it can be distracting to some students because they won't be able to discuss complex topics, but we're not talking about language lessons that are very advanced. We're talking about basics per them. Another thing is that often I see that this hesitancy to pair students or have mixed classes is has to do with our own educational backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, because we used to, in especially Western European, Northern European context, to hang out with people around our own age, and so the community-based teaching is not that popular. In the Middle Eastern culture, it's totally cool to have elders with children hanging out, and so they interact with each other in this context on daily basis. They're accustomed to that, and so when they come to the classroom, it's not such a structured learning, but at the same time, I think that for most part, it's uncomfortable for us as teachers, more than for our students.
You're getting some agreement in the chat. There was another question that came up that was given to us prior. We have learners who have been with us for significant periods and made little progress, remaining at A0 level. What approach do you recommend for these learners?
Well, if A0 level, that would indicate that there is completely lack of any sort of verbal abilities or even receptive skills, which I am prone to believe that there is some receptiveness and passive language skills on the side of the student. However, if there is really totally no progress, I would rather look into some perhaps neuropsychological underlying causes of that. That might be organic, maybe just language disability, learning disabilities and difficulties, because we need to remember that the population we work with is not only traumatized in general, but there are folks, as in other populations, that have learning disabilities and have learning difficulties that are more organic. And so you get folks like this, and obviously it will be more difficult to see that because of the verbal component, but I would just perhaps be really patient with them and ask yourself a question, what kind of purpose your lessons serve. So in other words, maybe you're not gonna teach them a language to a level that you would consider proficient. However, maybe they come to your lesson because they feel safe, and you can't fix all the people's problems, but you provide them, let's say, an hour a day, 2 hours a day of a safe, entertaining, engaging, positive environment, healthy environment, and that's great. And this is what you can do. This is what you have control over. And you can be a therapist to your students. This is something I was emphasizing last time. So my point here is that if you can be the best teacher ever, be the best teacher ever for them, because they're gonna remember you. You remember your teachers from your old years of education and your previous experiences, and they have influenced you in a way, even though they haven't been therapists. And so the same applies to you. You may notice a lot of different struggles, and the students may not be motivated and engaged, and they may have difficulties retaining the material. However, at the same time, at least you foster some sort of relationship. They get something out of it, even though you don't see outcomes language-wise. They come. If they keep coming, that means that they get something out of it, even though it may not be language-based. So you provide some sort of, you create an environment that is nurturing, and this is really important.
We have one more question.
The translators in the class. So when it comes to translators in the class, so it depends who is translating. I would say that it depends on the context. For most part, you don't need a translator in the class for teaching a language, especially with TPR. That's the point. You teach a language, you immerse your students. There's no need for a translator with children and with adults. I cannot really imagine a language class with a translator, honestly. Unless there are some difficulties and severe problems. And I've been in those situations myself, where I've been relying on translators, but it had to do with other things like behavioral stuff, some outside situations not related to language lesson in itself. So if you feel like your students don't understand and can't follow along with you, the easiest way would be to get a translator, because that's super fast. But then you foster their reliance and dependence on translation. You don't want them to do that. You want them to develop skills in the target language. If you recall how you developed, let's say, abilities in speaking a foreign language, if you keep relying on translators, it really slows down your learning. You don't want that. You want your students to try to express themselves with the words that they have, even though they're very, very simple, you can communicate. If you feel like they don't follow along with you, it means that you need to alter your instructions to suit their needs. And I want to just emphasize not to use children as translators in the context of managing conflicts in stressful situations. You can use them as assistants to some moderate extent, I would say, if you really must translate some instructions. But I would rather encourage you to deliver curriculum in the target language and encourage your students to express themselves in the target language, because if you give them that opportunity to rely on translators, I would perhaps rely on a translator myself then in the classroom, because that's more convenient for me, rather than struggling with putting sentences together. Yeah, and so that obviously they're going to rely on the translators because they are used to it. This is comfortable. Everyone would like it. It's just like we're in the place of fostering their confidence in speaking a target language and normalizing this discomfort. So having translators, I'd say that in all sorts of different meetings, in sessions, in refugee context, totally appropriate and very helpful. In language lessons, I'd perhaps rely on your skill set. That I'm sure it's really strong. And so you're asking me about balancing a group of illiterate students. So in the reading and writing tasks. So I've been in that situation, and what I was doing, I was basically delivering simultaneously 2 different curricula. It's not ideal, but what you do, let's say today we talk about work. So you need to be prepared for your students who have advanced writing skills to provide them worksheets and basically explain, and they understand that this is this kind of context. It's not ideal learning environment. So I would always have something on hand for them, so to keep them basically busy while I engage with more nonverbal stuff with my other students. And then again, they join. I would also make sure that the students who are more advanced, they feel taken care of. So I would ask them questions. I would perhaps ask them to explain something along with me. I would ask them to answer more complicated questions once in a while. It's the matter of diversifying the activities that you do. And sometimes that would mean that you need to prepare activities for both at the same time. Mixed ages of children, that can be a trouble more than with adults, because children developmentally have different attention spans and cognitive abilities are forming and shaping. So a 6-year-old is not gonna sit down for 20 minutes as a 13-year-old may. So this is really challenging. And so what I would encourage to do in that environment is to have a lot of games. A lot of games that all children can be involved in. So again, those sort of games that require, for example, to interact with the words, prepare them these story sets. So for younger children, you might give these stories and just ask them to repeat these words to each other, or just to repeat them basically. And for all the students, you might just alter this instruction a little bit, tweak it, and say you tell the story about these words, or perform it. The games that are based on performing work across the ages, and I've been quite successful with introducing them to children with mixed ages. All sorts of puzzles are also great. If you see that younger children are getting distracted, give them something that they can manipulate with, coloring, segregating something. You can, but again, this is on your side, you need to prep something. So always, like when I teach face-to-face, I always had with me some sorting cards, or coloring sheets, or puzzles for younger children, of course related to language learning, but something that I can keep them busy with, because sometimes it takes me 10 minutes to instruct older children, and the younger ones are just getting really distracted. So give them something to manipulate with, that is engaging and fosters learning, and at the same time they still will listen, so they develop passive language skills anyhow. But again, that comes back to the preparation, which perhaps is, I don't know, it's not an ideal answer, but there is no quick fix to that.
Great. Shall we wrap it up there for today?
I think so.
Thank you so much, Diana, for your time, for hosting this webinar and the one before. It was really, really interesting, and I hope most people found it really useful and can take away your ideas and put them into practice in the classroom. That would be great.
Hope so too. I'm just gonna send you my email quickly if you want to get in touch.
And I'm going to also put the feedback form in the chat as well. So you have to copy and paste it into your internet browser. But if you can take a moment to do the feedback as well, that would be great.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, it's a pleasure for me to meet all of you, and you are doing such an important and great and creative job. And it's, I know it's really challenging, but I think it's also at the same time very rewarding to work with folks from so many different cultures and teach them and successfully get them to speak with you and observe how they thrive. So I think it's a great also teaching exercise to work in this context, and really rewarding. I personally love it, and I hope you do too. If you have any questions, let me know in regards to the materials, or if you have some specific questions about some specific students with some specific challenges, let me know. Or if you need some assistance with the online teaching or transferring to that, I'm happy to give you some tips or resources if I have some experience with that.
Great. Thank you again, and thank you everybody for attending today. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones, new names, not so many faces.
It's true. Thank you, Colette.
Cheers, everybody. Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.